sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each one should give what they have decided in their heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, He has scattered and brought His gifts to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Now He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You'll be made rich in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of God's people, but is also overflowing in expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, men will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you, because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for His indescribable gift. The pastor shared a letter with his congregation one day from a couple who had moved to that community some time shortly before that. And this couple shared that they had moved to that town, or that community, because it was a business opportunity. But that didn't pan out. And to make a long story short, they were evidently self-employed, and they got behind in their quarterly taxes, as well as their other tax payments. They wound up $40,000 in debt that they put on credit cards. And then there was another opportunity to start a business. And about that time, one of the pastors was encouraging them to tithe. And this guy's going, "Are you nuts? I'm $40,000 in debt. I owe the IRS this much money. And you what? Are you nuts?" And the pastor said, "Try it." So he said, we thought we would. We decided that we would give the Lord the first part of whatever check we had. So we did. So later on that week, once we made that decision, I went that first check that week. My brother and I were around working on different construction sites. This gentleman was a carpenter. And this builder said, "You carpenters?" He said, "I got a house that's ready. You want to start?" "Sure." He says, "And I'll have about 20 in the next 12 months." He says, to make a long story short, once we started giving God the first part, we've been able to go from renting to owning our own home. We've been able to restructure our debts, and we have a thriving business. All because they learned to trust. And that's the paradox of giving. Think about it. Why is it that you can give things away and still have more than enough? Isn't that paradoxical? Doesn't it seem like if you give something away, you just depleted your resources and you've given away what you need? But God says, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will reap generously. There's a paradox here, folks. I don't understand it. I'm not going to explain it to you because I can't. But all I know is what God says and what I've seen happen. So the first thing Paul is trying to teach us, and by the way, Deb said, "You got to preach on giving again this week." I said, "Yeah." She says, "Last one?" I said, "Last one." Good. I love my wife. At least I think I know what's going on. My dad-in-law is a good farmer, but he's not that good. He can't grow something out of nothing. God can. And his comment was, this wasn't because I'm a good farmer, it's because God said, look, I can do anything. And he gave him that harvest because my father-in-law has the gift of giving. He gives more away every year than I earn. I know that much. Because he's got the gift. And God keeps giving him more. So, back to this farm metaphor. In the spring, when you got to go buy seed corn, do you shop around and find the lowest price? Oh, Asgro's going to beat Pioneer this year. I think I'll plant that. No. You look around, you see who's got the best stuff that I can afford to put in the ground. And you do. You put the best in because you want a harvest. You want a good harvest. Now let's say, he decided that this spring, well, it's really too much work to plant. I think I'm just going to let it grow when it grows. Because God will bless me and I'll have a great reward at the end. We make Doyle some reservations at this little place up north. Right? We'd offer him a nice place where he could recuperate. Because we think he's nuts. But how many of us do the same thing financially with God? We say, well, God, bless me because I'm a good person. But again, the farmer doesn't put it in the ground because he's losing it. He puts it there because he knows he's planting it and is going to receive a harvest. And God's looking at quality, not quantity. You go to Mark chapter 12, Jesus watches the widow put in her 2 cents. And so she gave more than everybody else. Why? Because she gave for what she had, not just a tip. Then you go to Proverbs. It says, one man gives freely and gains even more. Another withholds unduly but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will be refreshed. Generosity results in God giving back to you. Because when God counts, this man writes, for the Lord counts whatever is given to the poor is given to himself, and so repays it later with large interest. This teaching should be firmly fixed in our minds that whenever fleshly prudence, this is an older comment, holds us back from doing good out of fear for what we shall lose, we immediately resist its prompting by remembering how the Lord declares that in doing good, we are sowing seed. But I want to follow that up with another comment, is that giving is a sacrifice. This is not an investment. I've heard people say, well, God will bless you with 100-fold return, as long as you give to Him. Hey, if I get 100% return on my money, that's not the way God works. He says, give it to me and trust me. I will give you what you need. And this needs to be something you decide. This isn't a casual decision where you wake up in the morning and go, I'm just going to give it all away. It's something that God says, think about. Take a look and ask me. But also, it's an opportunity for everybody to do. Because we're not giving from what we have. We're giving what God has provided to us. And again, as regularly as the resources of the cheerful giver are taxed by his generous giving, they're replenished by divine grace. The reality is we're never losers with God. Some people say we should teach tithing. You should preach tithing. Everybody needs to give, must give 10%. Well, for some of you, 10% is going to be an incredible stretch. For others of you, 10% is less than the tip you leave in the restaurant. By the way, you want to do something fun sometime? Give the waitress a generous tip. They gotta go. What happened? Okay? Because waitresses work for peanuts and get by on tips. You want to bless somebody, try that sometime. It's kind of fun. But back to this point. For some people, a tithe is a tip. What about generous giving? What about saying, what give? What do I need to give back to God? What is God prompting me to do today? Because on reaping, if we're going to harvest, you got to plant it first. Now, interesting story. Man was serving as a missionary in Chile, kind of the mountainous region, right on the coast, a place where there's very little possibility of income, high poverty rate. He's pastoring this church as a mission. The average giving is about $6 a month. And he's thinking, I'm going to be here a long time because they can't afford no pastor. Well, this middle-aged couple had become Christians through his ministry, and they were starting to come to church. And they started reading the Bible every morning. And one day, he stopped by their house, and they said, Pastor, what's this tithing? We've seen it in the Bible. We don't understand it. What does that mean? And he's going, I'm looking around. These folks are employed. They got 25 chickens that are feeding them. Somehow or another, they're managing to feed the chickens and themselves. And that's about it. But he's kind of, being a good pastor, not saying much. And I said, look, and the house says, I want to know. Tell me. So I said, I took him to 2 Corinthians. I explained this whole concept. Okay? Next Sunday, he said, he handed me an envelope with about 19 cents. A few pesos. That was their time. Now, this couple weeks later, before the man, his pastor, is riding past the house on his bicycle, and they flag him up and said, Pastor, come here, we're going to tell you something. And then, well, it was the husband of the head of the house, the family, the husband. He said, Pastor, on Sunday we gave our tithe, but on Tuesday morning we went to the cupboard. There was no food to be had for breakfast. We were about ready to reach for our tithe envelope and go buy some food. And we said, nope, that's God's. So he said, we didn't have anything else to do. We didn't have breakfast, so we went out 10 hens. He says, normally in the morning there's no eggs. He said, but there were eggs. So no breakfast. He said, after we had breakfast, man came by with a push cart. He needed some fertilizer. He said, we cleaned out the hen house. We got a pretty good return for it. So my wife needed a new pair of shoes. So she got the bus and rode around the lake up to a larger town, where she found her nephew owned a shoe store. She's picking out a pair of shoes. She's going to pay him for them. Oh, no, Auntie, I couldn't do that. These are my gift to you. Shortly thereafter, he was offered a job in a major project that was going to last 2 years. And now they were able to give on a much larger income. They kept that tithing. People in the church heard about it. They started giving. They started finding the same thing. They went from being able to hire a part-time pastor to hiring their own full-time pastor to expanding their property to continue to grow. All because one person said, here's my 19 cents. Now, if God can do that with poor Chilean peasants, what would he do with a North American congregation that was committed to giving? Another pastor talking to a parishioner who never made giving anything to his church. I was visiting with him and asked him to look out his front window. What did he see? He was looking in the windows. I see my kid. I see the backyard. I see the trees, the sunshine, the warmth. He said, let's go to your bedroom. Look in the mirror. He said, what do you see? I said, myself. I went back to the living room, sat down. Pastor says, you know what the difference is between the mirror and that window? Is the mirror, they're both glass, but in the mirror is a little bit of silver. When you put a little silver in it, all we see is ourselves. He says we need to start looking and see what God has for us. Because Christian generosity may involve some denial. You may not be able to take the latest and greatest trips. You may not be able to keep up with the latest car models and designs. You may have to give something up. On the other hand, as we do that, God says, I'm going to take care of you. Again, this one quote, this denial enlarges our hearts to receive rich blessings of contentedness and launches us into the limitless sea of divine grace where we learn experimentally that God does indeed supply every need of those who trust Him. So, what do we got? We're stewards of God's grace. We've been given so many wonderful things. And where does the bounty begin? It says in verse 10, now He who supplies seed to the sower and bread to the food will also supply and increase your store of seed and enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. So what happens, God says, as you start trusting me, I start trusting you with more. Again, go back to my father-in-law. God blessed him because He knows what He's going to do with it. He's going to turn around and give it away. He's not going to hoard it. He doesn't put it in the bank. He gives it away because God keeps enriching. But I want to point something else out. A lot of the translations you read, it says that you will be made rich, or to something in fact, I forgot to get this verse squared away. It's not that you will be enriched. Okay, verse 11. You will be made rich in every way. That's most of the translations read that. It says you will be rich. The Greek here is not will, it's a present tense will. It's you are being enriched in every way. See, we're already rich. God has already blessed us with His grace and His mercy. He's already given us so many wonderful things that we can give out of that abundance. So, but the foundation of that giving is not what's in my wallet, not what's in my pocketbook. What you find right here. This is the blessing, the opportunities we have. We have eternal life in Jesus Christ. How much would you pay for that? How much would you give to have that? You don't have to pay for it. It's only yours. It's grace. So God said, based on what I've given you, what are you going to do with what you got? What are we going to do with what we got? Now, I think I'm going to stop. I got more to say. I've always got funny things. One last story. Man was watching some swallows, baby swallows, and parents wanting to teach them how to fly. And so it was by a lake, and there was an old dead tree branch, and 3 baby swallows were lying up on the branch, and the parents on the inside. And that parent just keeps moving like this. The babies keep sliding out, one farthest over, finally there's no branch, falls, hits the water, right? Swallow about halfway down, flat going down, oh wait, this thing's working. Takes off. Second one, same thing. Takes off. Third one, I'm not going to be quite so bullied. Gets out to the end, at the last possible minute, let's go just a little bit, flips upside down, is hanging on for dear life. Now, parents not having any of this, keeps pecking on the talons until this poor little bird has to let it go. And you know what happens? It flutters down and all of a sudden it takes off. Because the parent knew that birds have feet and legs and can walk. Birds have talons that can clamp on the branches. But the defining characteristic of a bird is that they fly. And a bird that doesn't fly is not a bird. A Christian can walk. We can earn money, we can keep things, but the defining characteristic of a Christian is that we give based on what God has given to us. And what does God then come back and say to us? What does God say for us? Is that we then begin to experience joyful giving, but also the enrichment of giving. Because as you give, God returns that to you. Not 100-fold return in your bank account, but the opportunities to experience the grace of God each and every day. So that's it, folks. That's the last one. I want you to understand something. I had to stand up here and say, give because we need money. You never hear this. But I want you to give because God, and I don't care where it goes. Okay? I'm not saying you have to funnel it to the deacons so that they can make sure he's given appropriately. I want you to give based on what God has called you to give, where God has called you to give, to support the missions that God has called you to support. Which, by the way, we stopped by yesterday and dropped one of the seminary express boxes. In the past couple of years, we've had about 20, 25 boxes. Anybody want to make a guess how many boxes we donated this year? 48? 49. The goal is 40. 50 now. Oh, pardon me. 50. Okay. Double. Why? Because you folks are generous. Put together a little shoebox. You don't miss it, do you? Anyway, enough said. Let's pray. God, thanks for the joy of giving. Thanks for the fun that you've made this. That we can celebrate each day and be enriched by your grace. Now bless us as we try to do what you called us to do. As we try to be your servants and your ambassadors of grace. And God, thanks that we can talk about money. Not because we need it, but because you've given it to us. So we ask it in your name.